Welcome to another episode of the Chicks on the Right Show, where we talk to our BFF and sponsor of the show, Zach Abraham from Bulwark Capital Management. Zach, we have not talked since the election.
I know, big things, huh? Big things, big changes. That was, I feel like that was like an adult version of Christmas,
Right?
you know?
Oh my gosh, what
And
an amazing week.
yeah, and the holiday was the win, and the presents they're still being opened. They're getting to watch the absolute freak out of these people on the left. And I'm just like, I don't like to cry at other people's misery, but God, this is just the best comedy ever.
I know it really
It's
is.
too good. It's just too good.
And now there's all these the new cabinet appointments are being announced. They're trickling out slowly but surely. But I think what a lot of people are super, super stoked about is DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which is now apparently going to be co-led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. And like the left is trying to make fun of that by saying, oh, it needs two leaders. How efficient is it? But they're not even getting paid. Like these are unpaid jobs. They've been given a very specific deadline of July of 2026, or slightly before that, I think, so that everything is done before America's 250th birthday. So what are your thoughts? Like, how do you see this working? And do you think it's realistic that they can actually do some cost savings stuff?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, look, the people that are ridiculing it are the same people that think men should be in women's sports. So, take your opinion and go fly a kite as far as I'm concerned. You know what I mean? Like these people are not serious people. We have had, I have had interactions and scrapes with government and government regulations. And until you really fully realize how inefficient these places are and how much money they waste, it's shocking. And I'll just say and there's so much of it. I've got a family member who's created a really cool, innovative product that can be used on any vehicle that has ballistic glass. Okay, and they've now begun to sell this to the Department of Defense, and a great product. It's taken off. It's going to save the American taxpayers ridiculous amounts of money because it's going to eliminate the need to replace ballistic glass all the time. And ballistic glass is incredibly expensive. So like in $150,000, $200,000 military vehicle, if it's got ballistic glass in there, you're probably looking at a total of $60,000 worth of ballistic glass. And if this ballistic glass sits out in the sunlight over time degrades its usage and then turns it yellow, so you can't even see through it.
Oh,
Okay,
wow.
so anyway, long story short, going through this process, I'm helping them out with this business, and going through this process, you realize in the gateways to sell it to the DoD have been designed by bureaucrats, and those bureaucrats have formed companies to stand in between the government and the company and take a massive amount off the top. So right out of the gate, yeah, we were willing to sell this product for, let's say, $2,500 to the DoD. By the time we go through this process and they get their cut, and this is just a gatekeeper, right? They're adding no additional value. They tack on an additional $1,500 per item. Okay. And that's the way the system is set up. You have no other choice. So when these people laugh at these guys' ability to cut, you could cut hundreds of billions of dollars from the government budget, and nobody except the people that got paid to do nothing would be any the wiser. None of us would know this. And it's hundreds of billions of dollars of waste, if not more. And that's
just one teeny tiny little aspect.
Yes, but what it shows you, you hear about, $25,000 toilets getting purchased by the government.
Right.
A, those aren't exaggerations, and B, this is just an exaggerated version of what I was just telling you about, right? It's the middlemen, and they want it to be as opaque and complicated as possible, because then the only way to navigate those challenges is by hiring one of those middlemen firms, right? So you look at the way it's set up, and they're going to give you good excuses for why it's that. You go through the process and you realize this is a money grab, pure and simple. And it is adding I bet you that aspect alone is adding 30 to 50% onto the cost of any good the Department of Defense purchases,
Oh
right?
my gosh.
And you have these middlemen who are just making bank. And it literally is coming right out of our pockets. So can they do it? I mean, you and I could step in and cut hundreds of billions off the budget without anybody noticing. And then you look at these two guys and the accomplishments. I mean, these guys in one of their fingers has accomplished more than all of Congress put together, right?
Right?
So can these guys do it? Yes. And it's low hanging fruit. It's going to be simple. My hope is that the Trump administration listens and actually institute these changes. And looking at what Trump has gone through over the last 4 years, and looking at his cabinet picks, it's clear to see he's coming in with a completely different MO than he had in 2016. And I think he's determined to slash and burn. And I'm cheering him on. And quite honestly, my only fear when I look at this is that they don't go far enough, right? Like that's,
Yeah. I I don't know, cuz they seem very very determined and they are very committed to this task. I know Elon's saying, "Oh, it's going to happen way faster than the deadline they gave us. Everything's going to be super transparent." They're even saying, if you like, we're going to create a site that shows everything that we're doing. If you think that there's things that should be cut that we're not cutting, or if you think we're cutting things that shouldn't be cutting, you have a platform to be able to tell us. So I think transparency is going to be the name of the game with them. But like, how do they even start? Like, it's not just DOD, right? It's every single government agency. I can't even imagine like where you begin.
yeah. So I've thought a lot about this because of my interactions and dealings with uh, some government regulators myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think it's already starting. So the way, and when you understand the way these regulatory bodies work, so the president has the ability to appoint the head of these regulatory bodies, right? But those regulatory bodies are run internally by a board of regents, if you will, or somebody else that's appointed, right? So what I would like, so you start off by replacing the head of the agency with somebody that is simpatico to the way you're thinking, right? That has those same kind of priorities. And then that person can really give you a boots on the ground view of what is really going on inside, what is transpiring, how things actually work. And then from there, um, I'm not an expert in the process by any stretch of the imagination, but from there, especially now with the red wave turning, Congress red as well. Now
Mm-hmm.
you've got theoretically the power of the purse, assuming that you can hold those votes and you can do that. So A, you replace the person at the top, and then B, you mandate these changes. And if those changes if they can bureaucratically stop that anyway, you have the ability to starve them out of government funds. So basically, you can sit there and say, now there's a process you have to go to. You can't just cut it off. But basically, you'll have the ability to sit there and say, okay, if you do not capitulate to these changes, you're not getting paid.
Yeah.
We're just going to withhold the funds. So I think that's where you start. And then, like I said, I don't think it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be like fishing in a stock pond, right? Where the question is literally going to be, where there's so much here. Where do we start? You ever have one of
Mm-hmm.
those jobs, like especially as a kid, where your parents tell you to go do a job and you walk outside and you look at it and you're like, I'm so overwhelmed. I don't even know. You know what I
Right.
mean? Okay. I think that's kind of like on the good side where you go, okay, we've got to cut funds. And you're like looking around going, are you joking? Right. Like this is like hitting water if you fell out of a boat, right? Like this is
Right.
not hard. So, no, I couldn't be more excited about it. I think you can, will it make a meaningful dent this alone in the budget or the deficit? Probably not. But here's the thing, what the things they're going to cut, I think that it won't make a huge impact on the deficit. It'll bring it back in some. But the
Mm-hmm.
point is it's going to be painless, meaning I don't think you're going to see any economic impact from these cuts because you literally, like I was just using that example, you know, when you've got this bureaucracy set up the way it is, the only people winning in that game, it's not the businesses, I mean, they get paid, but they'd be able to sell their goods to other people as well. It's those middlemen and bureaucrats that are completely unneeded, right? That are just a value extractor from the whole process. Like that right there. We're selling this awesome thing that's going to save the taxpayers tons of money per truck. The bureaucrats get involved and take a third right off the top for themselves.
God.
And then they pass that on to the government. So we had the price that we wanted to sell it to, $3,000 per unit. They just marked it up to $4,000 and started selling it.
Ridiculous.
And yeah, and you sit back and you're like, oh my goodness, man, this is such a waste. The government's paying 25 to 30% over just so these guys that have nothing to do with building the product, designing it, patenting it, nothing, just so they can stuff their pockets. And of course, those people have zero incentive to streamline the process, right?
Right.
So,
because the more it costs, the more of a cut they can get for themselves too.
yeah, and people don't realize how arcane this is. They went to they went to bases. Okay, there were generals on those bases that said, "We want it, we're going to buy it." Okay, then they went through the process, couldn't buy it, couldn't execute the transaction because it is so it's like a giant maze, and it's unneeded complexity on purpose. So the only way you can actually transact with these agencies, even if the officers or the general of the base say we want the good, the only way you can transact with them is if you go with one of these middlemen that add $1,000 a cost onto the product for the government to pay. So,
oh my gosh.
So when these liberals sit there and say stuff like that, I look at them and I go, tell me that you're ignorant without telling me you're ignorant, right? Because
well,
you obviously
they're gonna still continue to have their freakouts because every time Trump does literally anything, anytime he makes a decision, there's a whole new reason for them to freak out and potentially for markets to freak out. And I know that you are doing another one of your live webinars soon to talk about projecting what will 2025 look like. How can people get in on that action?
Yeah, just go to bulwarkcapitalmanagement.com. You can sign up for the free webinar. And we're going to kind of go through I think there's a ton of opportunity ahead of us. One of the other things, though, that people really need to be conscious of is that, yeah, I think what Trump's going to do is great for the economy, but be careful about comparing it to 2016 because this market is currently trading at double the valuation it was in 2016. And so I think there's going to be big wins, but I also think there's places you really need to stay away from. And, managing risk through this next 2 years is going to be extraordinarily important.
Okay, so knowyourriskradio.com. People need to sign up today. Thank you
Yes,
so much, Zach.
yes.
Appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much for having me. Fun as always.
Investment advisory services offered through Trek Financial LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or on any specific security. Any references to performance of securities are thought to be materially accurate, and actual performance may differ. Investments involve risk and are not guaranteed. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. Trek 24308.